During the 18th century and the Regency period, wealthy people, were obsessed with masquerade balls. But why was this? In London, huge masquerade balls would be hosted almost every week, and people absolutely loved to go. The appeal for these balls was the fact that people could go as anything they wanted. They could even go as a hidden unidentified person, which gave them a freedom that they didn't have in their normal lives. Sometimes people spent lavishly on their costumes and simply wore a visor like this lady here to cover their face, but sometimes people went even further. Here, for example, we have a lady who's dressed in a Turkish costume, or Oriental costume as it was called back then, complete with a turban, a cloak and feathers, although it's still very westernised. But she was showing off her artistic skills and her knowledge of places further afield than Britain. Masked balls got a reputation for being incredibly raucous and racy and incredibly sexy. This is because you didn't know who you were talking to most of the time. It also allowed young people to flirt with other young people without their parents exactly knowing where they were or who they were talking to because of all the disguises. And scandalously, it also allowed people who were perhaps part of the sex trade in, so sex workers, particularly women who were mistresses of dukes and lords, they would accompany their duke or their lord, and no one would really know who they were. This, of course, was deeply offensive to many of the people there, but unless you actually unmasked somebody, you couldn't really accuse them. And also some respectable people, such as Elizabeth Chudley, who we see here, who was later the Duchess of Kingston, dressed incredibly racily. This is apparently a depiction of what she wore to one of the masquerade balls. She was totally topless, but because she was meant to be in the character of a Greek goddess, it was deemed fine. Although many of the women commented on it in their diaries and in their letters and were pretty scandalised. The men, however, apparently loved it. So as a result, masquerade balls really allowed people to express themselves. It allowed them to really push the boundaries and free themselves for an hour or two or a whole evening. And so it was considered the most fun that they could possibly get in London or wherever at the time. And then once they go home, they can take off their mask and resume their boring, upper class lives.